Hi class, in this video we'll go over chapter 29 in your textbook, or also depends on different textbooks. It might be chapter 16, but same information. So monetary system. Now we've been talking about money since the first day of class, and remember I always mention that money is not important. But you know what? Money is actually important for the economy. Okay, so let's go over money. All right, so first you need to know what is the meaning of money. So first know something called a barter. So barter system is whenever you have exchange of goods and service directly with one another. So with barter, that you're gonna have no money involved. That whatever you purchase is directly with another good. So imagine let's say you want a new computer, but instead of buying for it, you go to the seller and says, "Hey seller, I cannot pay you your new computer with a new phone for it. Let's do exchange." That's called a barter system. Now, for barter system, even though it works sometimes, but it's very inefficient. So there's a story about the old days in Soviet Russia. So in 1980s, Russia economy was going down. The entire communist system wasn't working, and then there was a company in Russia that making cement, like concrete. So it was almost time for Christmas, and then the company wanted to give employees like a holiday bonus. So they asked the employees, says, "Hey guys, we don't have money for this year, but what do you want us good? We can get you the good." So as usual, the employee says, "We want vodka." Okay, all right. So the cement company must get some vodka for the employees. So first, the cement company went to the vodka company, says, "Hey, vodka company, we have some cement. You have some vodka. Let's do exchange for it." But the guy selling vodka says, "Hey, we don't need any cement. But we owe money to a power company. I mean, owe money to a farmer. Go talk to the farmer." So the cement company went to the farmer, says, "Hey farmer, I know the vodka company owe you some money. Can we give you some cement? We call even." And then the farmer says, "I don't need any cement. Why don't you talk to the power company? I owe money to power company." So the cement company went to the power company, says, "Hey power company, I know the farmer owe you some money. Why don't we give you some cement? We call even." And then the power company says, "Well, that's fine. Build me a little concrete house." So the cement company built a concrete house for the power company. The power company forgave the debt from the farmer. The farmer forgave the debt from the vodka company. At the very end, the employee at the cement company got vodka for Christmas. Now that was barter, so with no money involved. Now even though it works, but it's very, very inefficient. And that's why trade involves something called a double coincidence of wants. That whatever you have, that I must want it too, and whatever I have, you must want it too. Without this double coincidence of want, then barter can be very, very inefficient. So money can make trade much easier. We don't require this double coincidence of want because everybody wants money. Now, so what is money? So money is a set of assets in the economy that people regularly uses. Now we all know what money is. You guys use this every day. But to be something called money, it must be able to use them to buy goods and services. And also for any good and service, for any asset you have, to be called money, it must be liquidable. Now, liquidable, it means how easy it is to turn your money into cash. That's called liquidable or liquidity. Okay. And then, by the way, the most liquidable asset is cash, because cash can be turned to cash very quickly. But also think about stuff like gold, silver. Those are all has very high liquidity. But assets such as like a house has very low liquidity because take a while to sell them and turn to cash. All right, so for anything to be called money, there are three criteria. So money must be a very good medium of exchange. That means everybody want it. You can easily exchange for something else. Number two, money must be a very good unit of account. So which means you can use this money to measure the price of something else. And number three, money must be a very good store of value. So you can use it, hold on to it, and then later on still have some value on it. Now, so for anything that satisfies these three criteria, that is a good function for money. Now, for example, gold is good function for money. It's good example for money because gold can be used as a immediate exchange, can be used as a unit of account, and can be used as store value. But if you think on the other side, imagine a Big Mac, the burger. Now that is not a good money, because even though Big Mac, you can use that for immediate exchange. You can, go exchange from your Big Mac, let's say give to somebody else and ask for their pencil. So that's a good medium of exchange. And then Big Mac can also be used as a unit of account. That means I can tell you that maybe one computer is equivalent to 100 Big Mac, right? So Big Mac can be used to measure the price of something else. But Big Mac is not a good store value, because if you hold on to it for like 3 months later, that Big Mac is not good anymore, right? So it must be a very good store value. All right, so that's the money. Now there are two kind of money. The first one is called commodity money. So commodity money, their money by itself has its own value. That's called commodity money. So gold, silver, cigarette, they're all commodity money. So money by itself has its own intrinsic value. Although this thing that we want to mention here is something called a gold standard. That prior to 1971, US dollar was on the gold standard. Then you can literally take your US dollars, go to our Federal Reserve, exchange gold for it. But later on, our economy decided that if you pack your dollar to the gold, then how much money you have will be limited by how much gold you have. But if the economy is really growing, you need more money for transactions. So that's putting like a constraint on the economy. So by 1971, at that time was President Nixon decided to take US dollar off the gold standard. So after that, US dollar was no longer our commodity money, because you cannot change for gold anymore. Also another example for commodity money, think about ramen noodle. So ramen noodle today is used as a commodity money inside the prison system now, because many of the state-owned prisons, their food is over there is so bad that the prisoners are using ramen noodles as currency. So that's called a commodity money. Now the other money is called fiat money. So fiat money, their money by itself has no intrinsic value. So which means money by itself is useless. Now your US dollar is a fiat money, because for US dollars, that value is only backed up by US government. So let's suppose if tomorrow US is being invaded by Canada, so US government is gone, and then your US dollar will be worthless, because it's just a piece of paper. Okay, and then this is how you guys remember this fiat money. So fiat money, remember, is worthless. So fiat, just like the car fiat, it's worthless. Okay, that's called fiat money. Okay, all right. I hope nobody drive a Fiat here. All right. Now, know what's a money stock? So money stock, they are the quantity of money circulating in the economy. So the total money supply in the economy, that's called money stock. So that including our currency, so how much cash you have on hand, and also coins, and also including your demand deposit. They're the checking account balance in the bank. So how much money you have saved in the bank in your checking account, that's called demand deposit. One thing about this money stock here, remember this: how much money we have is more than how much currency we have. So our total money supply or money stock is more than the amount of currency in the economy, because that's how I spell currency. It's more than enough amount of currency in the economy, because most part of our money supply or money stock is all coming from this demand deposit. It's just a number in the computer system. So for any economy who try to create more money, you can just print more money, or if anytime the bank is offering more lending, so bank lend the money out into the demand deposit, that is called money stock or money creation. So to measure our money stock, there are two categories, M1 and M2. So M1, they are your demand deposit, your traveler check, and also your currencies. They're part of your M1. So M1, they're very liquidable, very high liquidity. You can turn into cash very quickly. And also something called a traveler check. Now, we don't use them anymore, but in the old days, this was very popular among people who travel. You can buy a traveler check from your local bank, and then once you go to out of town, you can go to any bank and then exchange the traveler check for cash. It works just like cash. Now, M2, they're everything in M1 plus your saving account, your small time deposit, and then money market mutual fund. So saving account, there's just go to a bank, open saving account. Small time deposit, this is also called a CD. By the way, if you know what CD stand for, you are pretty old. Okay. If you don't know what CD stand for in here, tell you what, in this case, CD is not compact disc. Okay. And by the way, if you know compact disc, you're pretty old too. CD stand for certificate of deposit. Now what that does, that is a fixed time deposit in the bank. So imagine you go to a bank, you save your money for 3 months, okay, or 6 months or 1 year. So it's a fixed time deposit. And then the benefit of CD is that you have a little higher interest rate. So imagine if you open a saving account, they might pay you 1% interest rate. But if you purchase a CD for 1 year, they might pay you 1.5% interest rate. So a slightly higher saving account, interest rate on the savings. But one restriction for CD is that the saving time is fixed. If you want to get your money out early, you will lose the interest on it as a penalty. Okay, and then the other one you guys see very often in the bank now, it's called a money market mutual fund. So for money market mutual fund, it's also a type of saving account, but the interest rate is floating. So it depends on the market. So when the market has very high interest rate, you're getting a high interest rate. When the market has a very low interest rate, you're getting a very low interest rate. Okay, so M1 is everything that's very liquidable. M2 has everything in M1. So this part is important. So M2 has everything in M1 plus your other stuff that's not liquidable. So saving account, CDs, and then money market mutual fund. Now so this chart is very important. So for U.S. economy, our money supply, M1 is only about $3 trillion. But M2, which is your M1 plus your savings, your CDs, and your money market mutual fund, that's over $12 trillion. So our total money supply is more than our M1 because money supply is equal to M2. Okay, because most of the money in the bank, they're just a number in the bank. They're not internal currency cash. All right, so next, know what's the Federal Reserve. So Federal Reserve is the central bank of America. Every country who have their own currency have a central bank. There is a Canadian central bank, there's a Mexico central bank, there's also European Union central bank. So if you have any type of currency, there's a central bank to control that. And the central bank for US is called the Federal Reserve. It's also short for Fed. It was created in 1913 after many banks went down in 1907. And the purpose for that was to ensure our banking system is very healthy. We have a very stable banking system. So they oversee the banking system and also regulate the amount of money supply in the economy. All right, so your Federal Reserve is currently governed by this people called the Board of Governors. If you guys watch that movie Justice League or Avengers, this Board of Governors, they are like the Avengers of the economy. They're like the super team. So for this Avengers of the economy, Board of Governors, there are 7 members. Each member serve a 14-year term. They're appointed by the president and then confirmed by U.S. Senate. So now, guys, the thing is, if you think about the presidency, each president serve a 4-year term. Each senator serve a 6-year term, and each representative serve a 2-year term. But for Board of Governors, these guys each serve a 14-year term. The reason why it's so long because we want the Board of Governors to be truly independent, away from the politics. So whenever this Board of Governors making a decision, they're only deciding in the best interest of the economy. So not in the best interest of any party or any presidency. They're only making decisions in the best interest of the economy. So if you guys watch the news recently, you probably heard that President Trump is criticizing the Federal Reserve, who try to raise interest rate. Remember this, they're only doing that in the best interest of the economy, not the best interest of any parties. All right, so the current chairperson, his name is Jerome Powell. So Jerome Powell, now we have, even though each member on the team serve a 14-year term, but the chairperson serve a 4-year term. So each president can have their own chance to appoint their own chairperson on the from the board of governors to be the chairperson. Okay, so each one serve a 4-year term. Before Jerome Powell was Janet Yellen, and before Janet Yellen was Ben Bernanke, Alan Greenspan, and then Paul Volcker. So those guys, they're the most important person in the economy. Now, for the Federal Reserve, the system, the board of governors, they're residing in DC, and those guys meet every month or so to decide the direction of the economy. But the Federal Reserve System is made up of 12 regional Federal Reserve banks, and each one oversees a regional area in America. The one that's overseeing Houston is actually based in Dallas, so oversees the entire Texas area and then the northern part of Louisiana. The biggest Federal Reserve Bank in America is the one in San Francisco. That one actually see the entire western U.S. and also Hawaii and Alaska. But the most important Federal Reserve Bank is the one in New York City, because that bank oversees all the major banks in America. So if you're a bank in America, more than likely your headquarters is based in New York City, where Wall Street is. So that's under the oversight of the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, and also at the trading desk of the New York City Federal Reserve Bank. That's where they're buying and selling government bond. Later I'm going to talk about this. This is called an open market operation. All right, so the Federal Reserve jobs, including regulate banks to ensure the health of our banking system. Within Federal Reserve, there is an office called OCC, stand for Office of Currency Controller. So their job is to conduct regular audit on each bank. And then if OCC decided this bank is too much risk, then OCC have the power to shut down the bank and then make the bank to be sold to somebody else. So if you guys pay attention to your local bank, and then if just all of a sudden that your local bank all change names overnight, more than likely that local bank was actually forced to be closed and sold to another bank because OCC decided they're too risky. Okay, and then also your bank, your Federal Reserve can act as a lender of last resort. So your Federal Reserve is the bank to all banks. Now, for individual consumers, for companies, we cannot do business with Federal Reserve. We cannot go to Federal Reserve borrow money. We can only borrow money from our local banks. But if you're a bank in America, you have to have an account with our Federal Reserve. So the Federal Reserve is also the bank to all banks. And then they can also, again, act as a lender of last resort. So if the bank is short on cash, they cannot go anywhere else. They can go to Federal Reserve, borrow money. Another thing the Federal Reserve does is to clear checks between different banks. So suppose somebody write me a check from, let's say, Chase, and I deposit the check with my bank, Bank of America. Bank of America will never talk to Chase. So Bank of America will do, they will send the check to the regional Federal Reserve banks, and then the regional Federal Reserve Bank would take money from the Chase account in Federal Reserve and then give it to Bank of America account. So the Federal Reserve Bank is the middleman between individual banks when they try to clear a check. Now, if you guys watch the movie Catch Me If You Can, remember one part, the main character who tried to pretend to be an airline pilot, and then he'll forge his own check, and the check is always from out of town, and then he'll try to cash a check, even though it's not allowed by the bank, but he'll try to cash a check on the spot. But by the time when the bank realizes this is a fake check, it's already gone, right? So the reason why the process takes so long, because the banks will never contact each other. To clear a check, it's always going through the Federal Reserve Bank in the middle. So sometimes if you have an out-of-town check, that might take a couple of days to clear it. And also, that's the reason why when you guys try to deposit a check in the bank, that check wouldn't be available to cash immediately. You need to wait like 3-4 days for the check to be cleared. That's because the Federal Reserve is in the middle trying to clear all the checks. Okay. All right. So the other thing the Federal Reserve does is to control our money supply. So money supply is the total amount of money in the economy. Now, how much money you have in the economy will decide how good the economy is in the short term. Okay. So the more money you have, the more liquidity you have in the economy, money flowing more freely, then you might have more transaction in the economy, so better economy. But if you have not enough money, then you get a problem that we don't buy anything anymore and the economy slows down. So money supply is the quantity of money available in the economy, and in monetary policy is how Federal Reserve try to control our money supply. That's called monetary policy. Now, for our Federal Reserve, the most common way to control our monetary policy is called a Federal Open Market Operation, or Federal Open Market Committee. The FOMC, they are made up of the 7 board of governors and then 5 of the 12 regional Federal Reserve Bank president. So the one from New York City is always there. The one from California is almost always there. So there are 12 members on the Federal Reserve Federal Open Market Committee. Now, they meet every 6 weeks in DC to discuss the direction of the economy and then to consider the monetary policy. So either to increase money supply or to decrease money supply. Now, for this open market operation, all they try to do is either to purchase or sell our U.S. government bond. Now, this is how you think about it. Whenever the Federal Reserve is buying bond, when they buy bond, it's called an open market purchase. Now, for open market purchase, when they buy bond, they're giving money to the public. So increase our money supply. Because when they try to buy the bond from the public, they have to give the money to the public. And then one thing that you guys want to do a reminder about the U.S. government bond. So for all the money we owe to other people, now right now our U.S. government bond, the total value for U.S. government debt is about $21 trillion. About 70% of the money is currently held in America, in U.S. Many of your local banks, many of your companies, and many of the investors, they're holding on to 70% of our $21 trillion. So anytime when the Federal Reserve buy those bonds back, they have to give them cash to the public. So imagine that you have a bank who's holding on to some bond and the Federal Reserve want to buy them, then they will pay the cash to the bank to get the bond back, right? So that's called an open market purchase. That will increase our money supply. But if the Federal Reserve try to sell bond, that's called an open market sale. When they sell bond, they will take cash away from the public. So decrease amount of money supply in the economy. So just remember, open market purchase will increase money supply. Open market sale will decrease the money supply. All right, so also know, remember this, your money is your total currency plus your demand deposit. And then your behavior of the banks can be influenced by the quantity of demand deposit in the economy. So the more deposit they have in the bank, the more likely the banks will try to offer lending. But if there's less deposit in the banks, then the bank try to offer less lending. Before we talk about the banking system, one thing you guys need to know, that the bankers, they're the smartest people in the economy, because this is how the banks will make money. The bankers will take money away from you, give it back to you at a higher interest rate. That's how they make money. Okay, so imagine you want to save some money, so you go to, let's say, Bank of America, so BOA. You go to Bank of America, open a saving account, and then for the saving account, they will pay you maybe 1% on your deposit. Now tomorrow, You go back to the same Bank of America. You say, hey, Bank of America, I want to borrow money from you, and they're going to charge an interest rate. The interest they charge might be 6% or 7%, or even as high as 24% if you have a credit card, right? So they will take your money, give it back to you at a higher interest rate, and that difference in the interest rate, that is the bank's profit. So that's how banks make money. Now, if you're a bank, your goal is to make as much profit as possible, which means you want to lend out as much money as possible. Okay, so let's look at how the banking system works in America. So first, know what's a reserve. So reserve, they're deposit in the bank that the bank received but has not loaned out yet. So one thing you can think about this reserve, also think about this will be like the cash in the bank. So how much cash they have in the bank, that's also called a reserve. Now, if you have a bank that have 100% reserve system, that means all deposit will be held as reserve. So the bank will lose the ability to lend money out. Now let me say it one more time. Okay, so if you have a bank that have a 100% reserve system, that means whatever deposit you have, you cannot lend them out. They must be held in the bank as cash. Then the bank can offer no lending. Now, however, if you can lend the money out, then there'll be a different picture here. So let me show you an example. So suppose we have a bank that have let's say a 90% reserve system. So 90% reserve. Then anytime when the bank take in more deposit, well, let me go back. So anytime that when the bank taking more deposit, they can lend some money out. So let's suppose they're taking $100 deposit. Now, how much money can they lend out? So 90% must be kept in the bank. So let's do what is our required reserve. I think some of you guys complained that says my keyboard is too noisy. You know what? They don't pay me enough to buy a new keyboard, so I'm sorry. Unless you want to give some money to me. All right. So that is our required reserve. So how much money they can lend out? So the loan amount. Oh, should tap on the other side. That's fine. The loan amount will be your deposit minus the required reserve. Then that will be your loan amount. Now, guys, before we go to next level, I want to ask you guys a question. How much money do they have in this system right now? So for these numbers here, how much money do they have? How much money is there in total? Now, first of all, we have our $100. So $100 is our initial cash. That's a cash in the system. Now, also this new lending, $10 is also money in the economy, right? So the money in the economy doesn't just come from this printing more cash. Is that anytime when the bank offer more lending, that is money creation. So right now for this system, they have $110 of total money in the economy because you have $100 of deposit and then $10 lending. So every time when the bank offer new lending, we have more cash in the economy. Now imagine that your reserve ratio is not 90%, but you have a 0% reserve ratio. That says whatever deposit the bank take in, they can loan everything out. Then how much money would you have in the system? Then this number will be increasing by 100 every time somebody deposits the money back in the system. So with a 0% reserve ratio, how much money you can create in the economy when the bank offer more lending continuously, the number will be infinity because this deposit and loan number never decrease. And $100 can turn into an infinite amount of money in the economy. Okay, so we don't like that because if you have too much money, the money become worthless. That's inflation. So for our banking system and then for most of the banking system in the world, they're all called a fractional reserve banking system. That means a fraction amount of the deposit must be kept in the bank as reserve. Then they cannot loan the money out. And this ratio is called a reserve ratio. It's also just lowercase r. But sometimes you see a 3R, same thing. So the 3R stand for required reserve ratio. Okay, so that's how much money the banks are required to hold in the bank at any given time. That's called required reserve ratio. And then your required reserve or reserve requirement, that is your total deposit times required reserve ratio. That's your required reserve. So that's just a dollar amount of how much money that must be kept in the bank. So suppose our required reserve ratio is 10%, and then the bank taking $100 deposit. So $10 must be kept in the bank as reserve, and then the 90 can be loaned out as loan. So this is called a bank's balance sheet. Now on the balance sheet, you have asset on the left-hand side, liability on the right-hand side. And if you notice that this deposit is called a liability in the bank, because for all the deposit they have in the bank, they are not the bank's money, they're depositors' money. Okay, so the asset, they're your cash, how much cash that's reserved, plus how much loan they're giving out. So every time when the bank offer lending, your money supply will increase. So in this case here, your current money supply is going to be $100 deposit plus $90 for loan. That's how much extra cash we have. All right, so the banks are required to hold on to only a fractional deposit in the bank as reserve. So every time when the bank offer more lending, they're creating money in the economy. So they'll increase your money supply. But also remember, by just having more money doesn't mean the economy getting more wealthy. It just means you have more money available. So imagine that tomorrow, Federal Reserve decide to put 6 more zeros behind every dollar bill we have. So your $1 become $1 million. What does it make everybody rich? Probably not, right? Because if you just have more money, then the price level will increase. Your inflation goes up. So imagine you have $1 million and go to the store, you want to buy a loaf of bread, also costs you $1 million, then you are not rich, right? It's because you still have the same amount of good. So just by having more cash, that doesn't mean the economy is getting better, or doesn't mean you're more wealthy. All right, now if you keep this 10% going, so let's go back to our first picture. So first, we have our banks taking a deposit of $100. So that's our initial deposit, and then we offer lending for 90. So now our money supply is going to be $190. Now this 90 will be put back into the banking system, so somebody else will borrow the money and spend the money. And when they spend the money, this money will be deposited back into the system, so 90. And then another bank, a second bank, will offer lending again, but 10% must be kept in the bank. So 10% times 90 is $9. And then the other $81 can be offered for lending. So at this point, when the second bank lend the money out, our new money supply will be $190 from previously plus $81. So this would be $271 total money supply. Now for the next bank, when they're taking deposit of $81, they're gonna lend the money out, but they cannot lend all the money out. So 10% must be kept in the bank. They can only lend out $72.90. So now our new money supply will be $271. So $271 plus the previous level, that's from the previous level, plus the new lending of $72.90, and then your new money supply will be this would be 90, and then 3, so 343. So every time when the new bank offer more lending, our money supply will increase. But notice that this increase is in a smaller number every time we offer new lending, right? Because the first time was $90, and then second time is 81, and third time is 72.90. So how much money we're lending out is decreasing every time this process continues. So there will be an upper limit. So if you keep doing this continuously until the very end, you'll see that the total money supply will be equal to 1,000. So this is a simple formula. This process is called a money multiplier. And then for the money multiplier, the formula is your 1 divided by the required reserve ratio. So for our previous example, we did the required reserve ratio was 10%. So 1 divided by 10%, money multiplier is 10. So if you take in so your money creation, let me use this. So our money creation or money supply equals to deposit of $100 times money multiplier 10, then you have a total of $1,000 money creation economy. So money supply increased by 1,000. Okay. Now let me write it on the notepad here, so you guys can write this down. This will help you in your future notes. Okay. I don't need this. So required reserve. Oh, this is terrible already. Sorry, guys. Here, use this color. So required reserve equals to your total deposit times your required reserve ratio. Next, your excess reserve. So excess reserve, this is the extra reserve you have, so extra cash you have. This is your total reserve. So how much money you have right now? Total reserve minus your required reserve. And then next, your money multiplier. Equal to 1 divided by required, lower r, so required reserve ratio. And lastly, your money creation or money supply equals to your excess reserve times your money multiplier. Okay, so guys, write this down on your notes somewhere. This will help you in your quiz and test. All right, let's continue. So a bank's capital, the bank owner's asset. So how much the bank's owner put into the system, that's called a bank's capital. So in this case here, in our example, remember again, this is your bank's balance sheet. And for those of you who don't study accounting later on, balance sheet, the reason why it's called balance sheet, because it's always balanced. Terrible handwriting. Let me write this again. So balance sheet, so it's always balanced. And then for the most basic equation in accounting is your asset equals to liability plus equity. So for asset, there anything in the bank has value on it. So your reserve, that's the cash in the bank. The loan, how much money you're giving out. And security, this is like your government bond. That's your security. And then for liability, this is your deposit, how much deposit we have. Debt, how much money we borrow. And then capital is how much money the bank's owner put into it. That's called capital. Okay, so if you look at everything, add up everything on the left-hand side, will equal to everything on the right-hand side. So asset equal to liability plus equity. That's the most basic equation in accounting. So accounting 101. All right, next, Now, what's a leverage? Leverage means you use borrow money to supplement your existing fund for purchase of investment. So it's like borrow other people's money for investment purpose. That's called leverage. Leverage ratio is the ratio of asset to bank's capital. That's your leverage ratio. So in our previous example, our total asset was $1,000. The bank's capital is 50. That means your leverage ratio is 20. Okay. So for leverage ratio, the lower the ratio, the more stable the banking system is. But if your ratio is very high, then less stable the banking system is. So back in 2009, when we had a financial crisis, for many of the banks, especially banks like Lehman Brothers, Bear Stearns, their leverage ratio was as high as 33 or 34. That means for those banks, most of the banks, a huge majority of the bank's assets were all borrowed money. So if those banks lose money, they might be at risk of losing borrowed asset. So that will make our financial system less stable. Okay, so for this number again, the lower the ratio, the more stable the economy is. But the ratio too high, then those banking systems might be at verge of bankruptcy. All right. Okay, so I'm gonna skip this. Not that important. We'll just barely mention this. It's not important. Let's see. All right, so this is important. So it's the Federal Reserve tool for monetary control. Federal Reserve can influence the quantity of reserve, so quantity of cash in the banking system, by doing two things. So first, by doing open market operation, so either buy or sell government bond, and third is when the Federal Reserve are lending money to the bank. Remember, your Federal Reserve is a bank as last resort for all banks. So for any bank who's short on cash, they can go to Federal Reserve borrow money. Now, Federal Reserve can also influence the reserve ratio, which means this would change the reserve requirement. Remember, the reserve requirement, that's your total deposit times the required reserve ratio. Okay, and then the Federal Reserve can also pay interest on the reserve. So telling each bank that if they save money with Federal Reserve, they will pay them interest on the money they saved. So this was almost never used in the early days, but since the financial crisis in 2008, 2009, our Federal Reserve decided to start paying interest whenever the banks save money with our Federal Reserve. So that way we can reduce the risk in the banking system. All right, so for open market operation, we mentioned this before. So this is whenever the Federal Reserve is either buying or selling government bond. That's called open market operation. When they buy bond, it's called open market purchase. When they sell bond, it's called open market sale. This is very often used. So this is the most widely used tool for our monetary policy. Next, the Federal Reserve can also lend money to the banks. So this would be as a last resort. So the banks are short on cash, they can always go to Federal Reserve borrow money. But the money is not free. There's an interest involved. This interest rate is called a discount rate. So whenever the Federal Reserve lend money to the banks, the interest rate they will charge is called a discount rate. So the higher the discount rate, the banks will borrow less money, but the lower discount rate, the banks borrow more money. So in those years of recession, the discount rate was as low as 0.25%. So almost free money when the banks borrow money from Federal Reserve. Another thing the Federal Reserve can do is to use something called a turn auction facility. So we only limit how much money we have lending to the banks, and then let the banks bid among themselves to see who can offer the highest interest on it. All right, so reserve requirement. This is require what is the minimum amount of cash in the bank to be held as the reserve in the bank, and then for reserve requirement, the higher the reserve requirement, the more lending banks can offer, the money supply will increase. Wait, I'm sorry. Let me got myself confused. The lower the reserve requirement, so the banks required to hold on to less cash, then the more lending they can offer. So lending goes up, the money supply will increase. Now, vice versa, if you have a higher reserve requirement, then there are less lending available, the money supply will decrease. Okay, so we can use the requirement for reserve to influence how much money supply in the economy. But this is very rarely used, because if you try to lower the reserve requirement, that might be putting many banks at risk of not having enough cash in the bank. So that's actually introducing more risk in the system. So that's why this is very rarely used. All right, and then next is paying interest on reserve. So ever since 2008, our Federal Reserve has been paying interest whenever the banks are holding cash with Federal Reserve. So the higher the interest rate they offer on the reserves they have in the Federal Reserve System, then the more stable the banking system is. And also this will change your money multiplier and also change your money supply. Okay. All right. So one problem for the monetary policy is that whenever the Fed try to control the money supply, it's always trial error. We don't have a precise control over how much money supply is. We can influence how much money supply is, but we don't have precise control over money supply. And also the banks cannot force our household to change how much money we have in the bank. And also the Federal Reserve cannot force the bank to offer more lending. We can only influence, but we cannot force that. So that was actually a problem back in 2008 when our Federal Reserve really tried to induce banks to offer more lending. But because there's so much risk going on, even at a very favorable interest rate, many banks refuse to lend the money out because they might lose the money if they lend the money out. All right. Next, notice the federal funds rate. So federal funds rate is the interest rate when banks borrow money from each other. So this is all very short-term lending. Most of their short-term loans, like overnight. And reason why banks need to borrow money from each other overnight, remember we have this reserve requirement. Reserve requirement. Let's suppose, let me use my spreadsheet. So let's suppose we have a bank, and this bank have a deposit. Why is it this? All right, so let's suppose the bank have a deposit of $100, and then the required reserve ratio is 10%. So which means the required reserve requirement will be $100 times 10%. So they're currently holding on to $10 in the bank. This is how much money they have in the bank. Okay, and that's how much required to have too. Now let's say tomorrow somebody come to the bank and then withdraw $5. That by end of the day, how much reserve they have in the bank will be only $5, because you had $10 before and now $5 withdraw, so you only have $5 left. But their new required reserve or reserve requirement will be $95, because you take $5 auto deposit times 10%. So they're required to have $9.50. But however, they only have $5. So they're short. They're short of so 9.5 minus 5. They're short of $4.50. So what they should do, they should wait until somebody else comes to the bank and deposit this $4.50, and they'll be okay. But if nobody comes to the bank, deposit $4.50, by end of the day, they must get the money from somewhere. So what the banks can do, they can call other banks try to borrow the $4.50, try to meet the required reserve for today. So those are called short-term lending, and the interest rate involved in those short-term lending is called a federal funds rate. So it's the interest rate the banks charge each other when they borrow money from each other. Now, this federal funds rate can be influenced by Federal Reserve. Whenever Federal Reserve does the open market operation, that's when the federal funds rate can be influenced. So imagine that the discount rate, that's the interest rate from the Federal Reserve to the banks. So your discount rate, not bond, banks. If your discount rate is very low, your federal funds rate is very low. But if your discount rate is very high, the federal funds rate is also very high. Now, also this can be influenced by our open market operation. So whenever the Federal Reserve buy bond, increase money supply will decrease your federal funds rate. So more money available, the interest rate goes lower. And whenever they sell bond, this will decrease money supply and then increase your federal funds rate. Okay, so guys, that's it for this chapter. Have any question, let me know. I will see you for next chapter. Bye-bye.